Major support for Out to Lunch is provided by the law firm of Jones Walker, established in 1937 with over 375 attorneys in offices throughout the U.S., providing a comprehensive range of services to a local, national, and international client base. JonesWalker.com. And by Hancock Whitney. Hancock Whitney is here for families, here for businesses, here for communities during this challenging time. Visit HancockWhitney.com/COVID-19 for the latest. And by Shorten Associates, legal recruiters in Louisiana and Texas. And by Peony on Magazine Street, exceptional women's and children's clothes and gifts.
From our socially distanced virtual lunch table in New Orleans, we're out to lunch with Peter Ricchiuti, Tulane University Freeman School of Business professor and director of the Birkenroad Reports. It's business, New Orleans style.
Hi, I'm Peter Ricchiuti. Welcome to Out to Lunch. There was a long, dark era in American business where nobody in a boardroom had any use for morality. Tobacco companies knowingly gave us cancer. Manufacturers didn't care what kind of waste they pumped into the environment. And as long as they were making money, food producers were unconcerned about what they put into our bodies. Now, those days are thankfully behind us. Today, there are for-profit businesses who are not only ethical and socially responsible, but whose very reason for existence is to make the world a better place. The people who founded two of these businesses are my lunch guests today. Fran Troutman is co-founder and co-director of a company called Glass Half Full. Glass Half Full is a manufacturer of sand. Yes, sand, like at the beach. Sand is the second most consumed natural resource in the world, after water. To make sand, Glass Half Full pulverizes glass bottles. These are the same wine bottles and empty peanut butter jars you normally put in the trash in New Orleans because the city recycling collectors won't take them. Glass Half Full will take all your bottles and jars. They've been turning glass into sand since February 2020, and they're currently recycling over 30,000 pounds of glass a week. Fran Troutman, this is one heck of a success story. Welcome to Out to Lunch.
Thank you for having me. That was an incredible intro.
Will McGrew is founder and CEO of a company called Télé-Louisiane. Télé-Louisiane is what's called a content creator. They make filmed content for commercial clients, nonprofits, and government agencies. What distinguishes the films that Télé-Louisiane makes from everybody else's is language. Télé-Louisiane's products are bilingual. They're in English and French. Télé-Louisiane's mission is to preserve and promote the French language as it's spoken in Louisiana. You might think, okay, well, that sounds like a worthy cause. Maybe it's a bit like the French Club in high school. Well, it's not that. Since starting up in 2019, Télé-Louisiane has discovered there's a real demand for French language media in Louisiana, and people are prepared to pay for it. Will McGrew, welcome to Out to Lunch.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Now, Fran, in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, all kinds of infrastructure fell apart in New Orleans. When we finally got recycling back, the rules had changed. We were only allowed to recycle paper, plastic, and aluminum cans. Since 2006, everybody here has been asking, why can't we recycle glass? Finally, thanks to you and your company, Glass Half Full, we can. And your meteoric, almost instant success is proof of the years of pent-up demand. I assume that the reason we weren't recycling glass in New Orleans is because it wasn't financially viable. It seems like you've solved that problem by converting glass to sand. Have you figured out a way to make glass recycling profitable in a way that nobody here had thought of before?
Yeah, I think that issue is ringing true all around America. A lot of municipalities are getting rid of glass recycling. Glass has been the first to go. And I think that has to do with our single sort system where we put everything in one bin, and then all of that stuff, the glass, the plastic, the pizza boxes, everything is going to one place, and then they have to try to separate it. Now imagine you're sorting all this recycling and there's just shards of glass everywhere, and you're like, what? I don't want to do this. Most people don't want to deal with that. And so I think that's why Glass Half Full has been so successful, is that we only collect glass. We're only getting glass. And so we don't have to clean it. We don't have to separate things. We get to see it coming in. It's just glass. We recycle caps and corks, but that's a very small part of it, And so I think that has allowed us to be a lot more successful than most municipalities, is that we're just getting glass and then we're making sand. It's a much more simplified process. And I think a lot of cities around America could learn from that.
I'm sure you are an example for a lot of cities. That's really terrific. Will, I have to say, as much as I love the French language, Cajun culture, and Acadiana, I'm surprised there's a demand for anything formal in the way of filmed content in French in Louisiana. I would have thought Louisiana French is mainly conversational, and at the most formalized it would get would be the lyrics of Cajun songs. But I believe that there are more than 30 French immersion schools across Louisiana, and because of that, there's a big market for filmed content that can be used in French education. Had you done market research before you started Télé Louisiana? Were you aware of this thirst for the French language media? If so, why did you think nobody else had done it before?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's a common misconception. I think that the real answer to your question, why no one had done it before, I think is largely the misconception itself, which is something I shared before I got started with Télévision, which is that many people think that Louisiana French is just folkloric, and it's not du bon français, it's not good French, or it's not a real language. And we're very used to that kind of concept because of the fact that there were limited efforts to professionalize and normalize the language, especially in areas where it was the majority language in Louisiana. And then also many of the efforts that did existed were thwarted or were insufficiently funded since the 60s and 70s. But what we realized is that, in fact, that was really just a political choice, and it didn't have to be that way. And the only thing that separates Louisiana from Quebec or Catalonia or the Basque Country or Acadie, where the Cajuns were originally from, is that those places decided to, from the public sector and private sector, invest in professionalizing the language, normalizing the language, and making the language a key part of the unique character of the place. And so that it not only kept the culture alive, but also was able to be a value add to attract investment and new residents and tourists, et cetera. And so, yes, I think a lot of the market research we did was first looking at those models of other regions and regions and provinces that are similar to Louisiana. And so thinking like those cases, like Catalonia or like the Basque Country, there's a market here, right? Just like there's people who speak the language or have parents or grandparents who speak the language or have kids in French immersion. But one of the unique advantages of Louisiana French being both a heritage language as well as an international language that in fact is one of the most widely spoken languages, French, by that I mean, is that we have a much larger market. And so we think that there's we know actually that there's hundreds of thousands of Louisianans who watch our content and want more of our content. But on the other hand, there's hundreds of thousands currently of international Francophones that watch our content. And the limit there, though, the upper limit is really in the millions. And so definitely the market was a little hidden, but both here and around the world, it's there because there really isn't anything like Louisiana anywhere else you go. And so if we can create content in someone's native language about this really unique place, the sky is the limit, so to speak.
And Fran, is often a term used when you're bringing something that's already too much of out there already. You bring sand to the beach. That has me asking, where do you sell sand? And is there a shortage of sand?
Yeah, there actually is a global sand shortage, and you wouldn't think that considering the deserts, the beaches, but the thing about deserts is that that's actually a different type of sand than we can use in construction specifically. You need more of a coarse sand. And then in terms of beaches, that sand actually washes away like every year. Every time you go back to Florida, they've replenished the beaches. They've put new sand on it, often sand that they've dredged up from the ocean, which causes even more harm. And so this sustainable alternative for sand is actually something that is going to be very valuable very soon. Once we realize how terrible dredging is and once we truly run out of the mined sand that we're getting. And so that's where my co-founder and I really found kind of our niche, is that like we need this coarser, more specific type of sand. We have all of this glass waste in New Orleans, and not just New Orleans, but all of Louisiana. So why not combine those two issues and have one solution?
Will, I got to ask you, I think of Cajun French as a little bit different than the French I learned. It's kind of like a patois, which I just threw that word around just to, kind of impress you, I expect to be fluent in French by the end of the show. But is that true? Is it not a pure French?
No, well, so Cajun French or Louisiana French is just a dialect of French, just like any other dialect. And so that there is some truth there that, of course, it's not the same as Parisian French, but we've kind of, or in popular culture, especially until recently, we went in the other extreme where we basically started thinking that it wasn't even French, right? Like it's not even mutually intelligible with French, which is not true. And so we have a good we created a good animated video with Codafil, which is called Quoi c'est ça le français louisianais? So what is Louisiana French? In which we explain in Louisiana French, in Cajun French, what is French, what is Louisiana French? Is it French? How is it related to other varieties of French? And so basically what it is, it's just like Québécois French or Swiss French or Belgian French, except a little bit more different given the geographic isolation of Louisiana French speakers. But right, so it's basically just, it's like Louisiana English, you know what I mean? We speak a little bit different than they speak in Britain, but it's almost, for the most part, very mutually intelligible. And so that's what we've discovered with Louisiana French or Cajun French versus international French. And then one of the other things that's so fascinating and that we've learned doing this work is that there's not just one, Louisiana French or one Cajun French. There's a variety of different dialects in Louisiana, and that's something that is often overlooked as well, kind of in popular culture. In that, I've spoken to obviously Cajuns that speak French in Louisiana, immersion kids that speak French in Louisiana, French expats from other Francophone countries, from West Africa, the Homa Indians that still speak French, many as a first language down in the Bayou parishes, obviously numerous Creoles, Black Creoles, White Creoles, mixed Creoles. And so all those different groups, and then also the regional differences have all their own, Frenches and Creoles. But at the same time, one thing that we've noticed and what we try to focus is both within Louisiana, there's much more in common, both on the language front and the cultural front. And then also looking to our international connections, the vast majority of those dialects are still very much intelligible with international French. And so that's a huge advantage because that means that opens us up to economic exchange with Francophone countries, Creolophone countries. And so, we have a window of opportunity where we can keep these dialects alive and try to catapult them into the future, and especially in the context of these immersion schools we have.
You're listening to Out to Lunch. I'm Peter Ricchiuti. I'm talking with Will McGrew from French language media studio Télé Louisiane and Fran Troutman from glass recycling company Glass Half Full. Hey, Fran, I got to ask you, when I was a younger man and growing up in Massachusetts, we'd have these blowout parties, and the next morning we'd wake up and nobody had any money, and our currency was to recycle these glass bottles for a nickel each or such. But what was going on with bottles then? Were they just being cleaned and put back into circulation, or were they being created into sand?
So most recycling that happens within municipalities, especially with those bottle bills, is that it'll get crushed into sand and then remelted and made into new glass. That's generally how recycling works, which is why glass is so beautiful and that it can be endlessly recyclable. It's like a circular economy. You make the bottle, you crush it, you make a new bottle, and it just keeps going and keeps going because glass will never lose its properties. It can be endlessly recyclable. And so, that's generally what happens in municipalities and with those bottle bills. And that's actually the best way to get people to recycle. You get every echelon of society when you have these bottle bills, because even, people who don't care about sustainability will be like, well, I can make a nickel on this. That's awesome. And then people who do care about sustainability will be like, I don't care about the nickel. I want to recycle. And that's how you make it work. Those who don't care about the nickel will pay for those who do.
And, you talk about people getting together. I guess this is maybe more during COVID, but I've gone to your location with my bottles there, and despite in keeping social distancing and all that, but it's sort of a social event. I've never been there where I didn't meet a couple of folks I knew.
Yeah, that's one of our biggest goals, is making recycling this fun and exciting thing, and making it an event, and come out and drop off your bottles, and don't be embarrassed of how many wine bottles and vodka bottles you have. Just embrace it. We're all in the same boat. And I think that's how we were so successful despite, being born during COVID. most businesses failed, and we were able to kind of keep this New Orleans spirit going, and like, come recycle, come like show us how much you've been drinking. Like, we're all going through it.
Just the opposite of what other towns would have there. It's like 10 tequila bottles. Bob, I think you have a problem. It's Will, I think the thing a lot of people would be surprised at is that we think of this French, Cajun French and Creole French as really being only around the Lafayette area, but you're in New Orleans, and there's an interest statewide, right?
There really is. There definitely is an interest statewide. I mean, both, historically, really, French was spoken throughout Louisiana, and this idea that it just, New Orleans is not part of Acadiana. I mean, technically, it's not part of the region that is Acadiana, but in terms of that was just a decision that was made in the legislature, I think in the 60s or 70s. But in terms of the historical and cultural reality, both in the past, French was very present and Creole was very present here in Louisiana. There's numerous musicians, famous people like A.P. Thoreau, obviously families like the Chase family in terms of from music to culinary to architecture, et cetera. Those roots are very here. But then also in the present, what we realize is like with the French immersion schools, I think New Orleans has the most students in French immersion of any parish in the state. And then in terms of number of French speakers, I think it's in terms of numbers, it's near the top. It's just that in terms of percentage, since we have such a large city, obviously compared to other parts of the state, and we've obviously since the early 20th century, when a lot of English speaking residents came in, we experienced much more growth than say Iberia Parish or some of the other, or Lafourche, for example, some of the other smaller parishes where there's a larger percentage-wide Francophone presence. And so, yeah, that's one of the things that we really tried to emphasize is that, of course, there's the language aspect to this, but really the reason why we care about French language in Louisiana, it has less to do with like France as a country, although, I admire France, I've been to France, I've learned a lot of studying like French literature and philosophy and stuff, but really it's because of the links with Louisiana and how we're trying to double down on our cultural assets, but also our environmental assets. That's why I think it's so interesting what y'all are doing in terms of recycling glass in this moment where we need to diversify our economy. And it seems like there's some efforts, but I'm not really sure if there is a strategic plan that's on track, right? I think we might need to do some catch up on that diversification front. And so why not look at our cultural assets and help create this kind of circular economy that Fran was talking about? And we view it very similarly, where it's like, we have this culture, let's create the media infrastructure to create programming based on that culture. And then that programming educates. And so other people can learn about the culture and then create their own content or learn to create products or services related to Louisiana culture, but then it also promotes. And so it creates Louisiana fans all around the world who either want to come visit here, come live here, come invest their money here, et cetera. And so, yes, that's the key, is really kind of emphasizing our commonalities across Louisiana, both in the French language, but then also the ways in which the French language is tied into festivals, food, music, and everything else we love about living here.
Hey, Fran, I'd like to talk to you about on the business side of things here. First of all, the machinery that turns glass into sand, I would imagine, is not inexpensive. I couldn't do this at home, for instance. That would, and then where do you sell the sand? The only thing I can think of is like the sandbags that help us survive each of the floods. Is it bigger than that?
Yeah. There's a million different avenues that we can take, and we're taking a couple at one time. So one avenue is sandbags. We gave away a lot of sandbags this year for the crazy hurricane season we've had, and that's going to keep happening. We'll always have hurricanes. We'll always need sandbags here in New Orleans, where we're below sea level. And then more creative ways. So, for example, one kind of division of Glass Half Full that we started is called NOLA Alchemy, in which we create new glass products, and not necessarily new bottles, because that didn't really interest us, but we create bracelets, we create necklaces, we're hopefully creating Mardi Gras beads. So using recycled glass, melting it down, and then creating something more beautiful and something that solves another problem, like the plastic issue during Mardi Gras. So creating Mardi Gras beads. We're also partnering with Crew of Red Beans on their bean coin initiative. So we'll be making little beans. There's so many different things that we can do. And then one of our really long-term goals is using the actual sand for rebuilding our coast. And my background's in chemical engineering. So I'm kind of heading up that research aspect and seeing, can we just put plain old sand? Can we make it even better? Maybe we can filter out phosphates. Maybe we can filter out heavy metals. The possibilities are endless, but one thing I know is that we'll always need sand. So,
and Fran, you when I was reading about the company, you have all these new initiatives that either haven't quite gone off the starting point yet or not. But what are they? I mean, I read somewhere where you've got even a couple of pilot programs for picking up at the home again.
Yeah, so that initiative has actually taken off. We have 1,100 people on the waiting list to get their glass picked up from their house, and we're servicing about 300 people. So that's a really popular program. The next will be bars and restaurants, picking up from them. I mean, they're our biggest producers of glass, and that's something we really want to get started this year.
And Will, I know you've heard this several times because of what you do, but when I talk to people from that region, the Lafayette region, it's always the same conversation. It's that they are very sad that their grandparents and parents had stopped speaking Cajun French in the house, and wish they could still do it. And I guess it was more than there was a state law, right, kind of banning French from the schools. I mean, Louisiana did this to itself.
100%, yes, definitely. And I think that's another misconception, is that there's this idea that by bringing French back, we want to kind of like return to colonial times, which is not at all the situation or not at all the objective. It's instead more of an understanding that, in fact, French and Creole and the different dialects of the languages that have existed here were very much native languages and heritage languages for millions of Louisianans, hundreds of thousands of Louisianans. For years, really, for over a century after Louisiana became part of the United States. And really, that's exactly what happened, is that people would say, oh, well, it just kind of naturally died off, which there might be some truth that there were some natural trends, but really there was a really aggressive political and economic effort starting in the early 20th century to extinguish French from professional life in Louisiana. And so there used to be literally, this is surprising for many people to hear, but hundreds of newspapers in French in every parish, including in Louisiana, in New Orleans Parish. Then there were, songs written in French, including in New Orleans, businesses in French, schools in French. The list goes on, all institutions that we have in English. But right, and basically in the early 20th century, I think a lot of it was related to influx of English speakers with the oil industry, but also other industries. It was decided, and it was also kind of simultaneously with the immigration from Europe, and not to New Orleans, but also to the country in general, and then finally with the Jim Crow movement. And so those confluence of economic and political factors kind of got forced behind a cultural homogenization movement. And so in 1921, exactly 100 years ago, the Constitution of Louisiana forbid the teaching of French in schools. And so it's kind of we're trying to find a way in the community how to market 100 years later that still there are native French speakers here, despite that. So yes, definitely, it was a choice. And so that's what we always say, is that we can choose to do things differently and create a new future for future generations.
Fran, I just can't, if whatever number you told me, I would believe, but how much does it cost to make sand, and how much do you sell it for?
That's a good question. We're still kind of figuring that out. The actual process of breaking the glass down and then turning it into sand is a money losing process. And that's why we're kind of supplementing it with these service-based products that we have, like the pickup from your home or from your restaurant or bar. So it's kind of those people who are willing to pay are subsidizing the recycling for those people who aren't willing to pay. Sort of like how the bottle bill works, how the poor people who want to make the money off of the bottle are paid by the people who don't care about making a nickel off of a bottle. So we're sort of subsidizing that process in order to make it work.
Fran, I just got to tell you, I teach at Tulane, so I work with a lot of young people with a lot of great ideas. What is it that made this work? I mean, you must have been just a lot more dedicated than your average young student.
That's probably had something to do with it. I mean, we were recycling in a backyard right off of Tulane's campus for like 4 months before we got a warehouse. I think it was that grit. And I think people really were drawn to that. They were like, these kids are insane, but I'm with it. Like, they're going to make it if they're this crazy this early on. And I think that's what's kept us going, as well as our crazy creative ideas, like bean coin or Mardi Gras beads or coastal restoration. Most people were like, that's impossible. We're saying, so what? We're going to try anyway.
Will, I started to look at the products you produce and the films and such, but the one that really grabbed me was The Adventures of Boudini, which seems to be kind of an animated, Cajun French Dora the Explorer. Is this kind of where you're going?
Yes, indeed. That is, in fact, now or almost our most popular video, but that is a series rather, we're producing with Codafil and the immersion schools. And so I think it's a good model of our business model, basically, which just shows that there's a demand here for the content. And so we got funding from the state and from the immersion schools to produce that educational content. And so they're learning lessons in Louisiana history and social studies curriculum, but then also lessons about Louisiana French language. But in fact, if you look at the views on that video, almost half of the views now, are up to 40% of the views are international. And so there's a huge demand kind of for these stories, even though they're super Louisiana, like hyper local Louisiana stories. There's a real interest to kind of learn more about it. And so, yes, so we just launched the first episode about a month ago, and we will have a new episode every 6 weeks this year. And so check it out, learn a little bit about Louisiana, and brush up on your Louisiana French.
There's a school of thought in business creativity that says there's no such thing as a bad idea. There's just bad execution. And that's in the same category as there's no bad dogs, no bad kids. If you've ever had a pet, been a teacher, had to listen to business pitches, you'll know that none of those statements are true. There are plenty of misguided business ideas, but it's also easy to take a great idea and mess it up in the execution. Fran and Will, you're both demonstrating how smart execution can turn a great idea into a profitable business. It's not as easy as it looks, and it's never as quick as you'd like it to be, but it's inspirational to know that here in New Orleans, there is a new generation of young people with fresh ideas and the talent to bring them to life. We look forward to following your continued success. Thank you both, Fran and Will, for taking the time to join me today on Out to Lunch.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
My guests on Out to Lunch today have been Fran Troutman, co-founder and co-director of Glass Half Full, and Will McGrew, founder and CEO of Télé Louisiane. We edited this show to fit into the time slot here on WWNO. You can hear our unedited conversation and find out more about Fran's glass recycling and Will's French language business by listening to the Out to Lunch podcast. You can find and subscribe to the Out to Lunch podcast anywhere you get podcasts and on our website, itsneworleans.com. If you want to know what we all look like, you can find photos from this show on itsneworleans.com and on our Out to Lunch social media. These photos were taken today by Jill LaFleur. You can find more of Jill's photos at lafleurphoto.com. One of these days soon, we're going to go back to hosting Out to Lunch around the lunch table. Until then, Commander's Palace is open for lunch Wednesday to Friday, dinner 7 nights a week, and jazz brunch on the weekends. Out to Lunch is a production of INO Broadcasting for itsneworleans.com and WWNO 89.9 FM. The producer of our show is Grant Morris, our technical producer is Eric Merle, and our researcher is Maggie Mendel. I'm Peter Ricchiuti. Thanks for joining me. I look forward to meeting you again next week for more business, New Orleans style, on Out to Lunch.
Major support for Out to Lunch is provided by the law firm of Jones Walker, established in 1937 with over 375 attorneys in offices throughout the U.S., providing a comprehensive range of services to a local, national, and international client base. JonesWalker.com. And by Hancock Whitney. Hancock Whitney is here for families, here for businesses, here for communities during this challenging time. Visit HancockWhitney.com/COVID-19 for the latest. And by Short & Associates, legal recruiters in Louisiana and Texas. And by Peony on Magazine Street, exceptional women's and children's clothes and gifts. And by Basics Swim and Gym and Basics Underneath Fine Lingerie. And by the It's New Orleans Happy Hour podcast. Mitchell Foreman wrote and performs all the music on Out to Lunch. You can hear Mitchell's music anywhere great jazz is sold or streamed, and at mitchellforeman.com.